Let us pray. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, send forth, we beseech thee, upon thy servants who bear office in this country, the spirit of charity and justice, that they may in all things walk before thee with steadfast purpose and a single heart, and faithfully serve in their several offices through Jesus Christ our Lord. O Lord, our God, who art the lover of justice and truth, give thy grace to our Parliament and to all who direct the affairs of our nation, and guide them by thy Holy Spirit, we beseech thee, that by word and deed they may promote the well-being of this people and set forward peace among all men through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us say together now the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. And now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all, now and forevermore. Amen.
Lynette is Senator, the Honorable. Legal Studies. So she's now Senator Dr. Lynette Hooker.
Messages from Her Excellency, the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor, the President.
The order here. I'm to announce that Senator Walcott is traveling on government business and will not be in attendance today. I'm to announce too that the minutes for the sitting of October 16th and 23rd are ready to be confirmed. We'll perhaps revisit that in a minute. I'm to announce further that Senator Lynette Holder has recently been awarded a doctorate in theological studies. I join you in extending to her warmest congratulations. And I'm to advise that she will hereafter be referred to as Senator Dr. Lynette Holder. I don't think we have, yes, we have, in the gallery as visitors, members of the Pink Parliament, they're headed by Rohana. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Headed by Ruel King, who was only a year or so ago awarded a medal by Her Majesty the Queen for her efforts in trying to end violence against women in the Caribbean.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the minutes of October 16th, 2019 and October 23rd, 2019 be confirmed.
The question is that the minutes of the Senate for October 16th and October 23rd be now confirmed. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methink the ayes have it. The minutes for those two dates now stand confirmed.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I'm commanded to lay the Duties, Taxes, and Other Payments Exemption Companies Order 2019.
Reports from select committees, questions to ministers, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate. Moved by Minister.
Mr. President, I beg to move that we suspend Standing Order 45.2 to consider the debt holder approval of debt restructuring validation bill in all its, pardon me? 45.2, 45.2. Yes, 45.2. So that we may consider the debt holder approval of debt restructuring validation bill 2019 in all of its stages.
That's the only one, 45-2. The question is that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the balance of today's proceedings. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. The relevant Standing Order 45-2 now suspended.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to move the first reading of the Medical Cannabis Industry Bill 2019 and the Debt Holder Approval of Debt Restructuring Validation Bill 2019.
I would normally have preferred you to do one after one, but the question is that the two bills so mentioned be now suspended for, sorry, we now read a first time. Yes, I saw a signal.
In medicinal, it's medicinal, not medical.
What did she say now?
Public business. Order number 7, sir. In the name of the Honorable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Debt Holder Approval of Debt Restructuring Validation Bill 2019.
Mr. President, I ask the permission of this Honorable House that we treat items 7 and 8, item 7 being the Debt Holder Approval of Debt Restructuring Validation Bill 2019, and number 8, which is the resolution to approve under Section 3.1 of the External Loan Act, some borrowings and the setting up of a sinking fund in Barbados to address our debt situation. The reason why we are asking for these two to be treated as a cognate, sir, is that they are both directly related to settling Barbados's debt situation, one on the domestic side, the other on the external side, and we believe that treating them together as a cognate would be to the benefit of this house.
The question is that the two bills, number 7 and 8 on the order paper, be treated together, and that we proceed with them as a cognate debate. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and the two matters will now be treated as a cognate debate. Items 7 and 8.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I rise to introduce this cognate debate, which speaks to items 7 and 8 on our order paper, I do so very mindful of the fact that they represent a milestone in Barbados' journey towards economic stability and recovery. As we debate this bill, Mr. President, it is important for us to remember where we began. Back in May of 2018, the government of Barbados, the new administration, would have taken over a crippling debt in this country. And before I continue, Mr. President, I have received word from a number of people who said sometimes we get technical. So I trust that you will, and this honorable House will, bear with me if I use the very simple language that all of us will be able to relate to. The debt we inherited as a new administration was crippling. And we recognized that the level of debt was unsustainable, that we could not keep up, we could not carry on, and we could not survive financially long term at the amount of debt there was and at the rate of the debt payments. And so when this Barbados Labour Party administration took over, and we compared what this country was producing, its output, what we would call our gross domestic product, when we compared that with what we owed in public debt, we found that the ratio debt to GDP was about 157%. Or it could be more dependent on which source you used at that time, which made us the third most indebted country in the world. That ratio was high, sir. Yes, that ratio was high, sir. And it meant in plain language that Barbados was not producing enough to pay not only our debt, but our bills altogether. And with so much money having to go out in debt payments, and I believe one of my colleagues will give you numbers in a minute, Barbados was not in a good position to take care of a number of things that the public and the people of this country needed, like roads, like garbage, like schools, like many of the other bills that this country had to pay. And the debt of Barbados, Mr. President, was made up of domestic debt, that was debt owed locally, and external debt, which was debt owed to our external creditors. And the government made a decision at that time, sir, to restructure the debt and to treat those two, the domestic part of it and the external part of it, separately. To do that, we had to come to an understanding with the people to whom we owed this debt, locally and abroad. We came to the understanding, sir, or settlement with our domestic creditors in 4 months, record time, and with an uptake that was significant in the 90% tile. And the settlement, sir, of our external debt took a little longer. And in so doing, it meant that Barbados waited just a little longer to have its reputation returned to where it is now headed. We have now got, at least in principle, an agreement on our external debt, settled with our external commercial creditors. The debt holder approval of debt restructuring validation bill before this honorable House. In this instance, what it seeks to do, sir, is to validate instruments that were received and issued by the central bank to debt holders, local debt holders, after we had made that settlement within 4 months. It validates the instruments received and issued to those holders, but that were not a part of the second schedule to the Debt Holder Approval of Debt Restructuring Act of 2018. So it validates that issuance. It also seeks to validate instruments received and issued by the central bank to debt holders, specifically holders of estate and legacy accounts, and individuals in respect of debt owed by state-owned enterprises. This bill also seeks to validate the payment of benefits to pensioners, which would have started since the 13th of November, 2018. And this bill seeks to deem them to have been lawfully and validly paid. Mr. President, not only did we settle our domestic debt in very real time, but we moved with urgency to start payments on the domestic front. And this bill speaks to validating some of those payments, which we would have moved with such speed. On the external debt front, we, Mr. President, I've mentioned, we have now launched an offer for external debt holders to exchange the debt they have for new bonds to be issued by Barbados. Now, this is the matter to which the resolution, which is at number 8 on the order paper, the resolution to move the passing to approve under the External Loan Act the borrowing of funds and to set up a sinking fund as well. And I'll speak a little bit more about that. Mr. President, when we dealt with the domestic debt, interest rates were in the vicinity of 7.58%. That was reduced in our domestic debt exchange to around 3.754%. In our external debt, our interest rates were as high as 13%, particularly on the Credit Suisse loan. And with every downgrade Barbados received, that had the opportunity to keep creeping up, that interest rate. We have now reduced those rates to around 6.5%. The External Loans Act, Mr. President, authorizes the government of Barbados to borrow money outside of Barbados for such purchases and for such sums as are approved by resolution of Parliament. Thus, we are considering this resolution as well. And when we borrow, government must secure all borrowings by issue and sale of securities. So, sir, borrowing is in the form of issuing securities then. And so our government, having come to the agreement in principle that we have with our external debtors, now deem it necessary to exchange eligible existing debt for 2 new series of securities up to US 580 million. That is what this resolution speaks to. And this new borrowing, in the form of new series of securities, would be for the purpose, sir, of supporting the principal agreement that was reached to restructure our government's external commercial debt. This resolution, sir, also proposes the establishment of a sinking fund, which in effect, Mr. President, it is money you set aside or you save up over time to help pay off debt. And by having that sinking fund, it would ease or soften the burden or the hardship of having to make a big outlay at one time. And so the resolution asks for these two. What all of this means for Barbados, sir, is that once we have sorted through all the legal and administrative paperwork to conclude this external debt exchange, the perceived country risk with Barbados is reduced, and Barbados will find itself more attractive to foreign investment. Such investment will be important contributors to our much needed growth. It is estimated, sir, that with the current agreement in place with regards to our restructured external debt, Barbados will save approximately $1.2 billion per year over the next 4 years. And that, Mr. President, pardon me? And that would free up some more resources, Mr. President, to help take care of some of the country's needs that I mentioned earlier. Mr. President, Barbados has come quite a long distance in a short time to resolve our debt situation, both the domestic and the external debt. We have saved the dollar because of the decisions this administration has made. The discipline that this administration has brought to financial management of this country has stood us in good stead. And the effort we are making to bring about economic recovery for all to have a better life is ongoing. And sir, it is with all of these in mind that I have great pleasure in bringing and introducing this bill and this resolution for consideration of this honorable house. And with these few simple words, sir, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Question is,
Go ahead. Senator Drake.
happy to recognize you, Senator Drake.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words on the bill before the House and the resolution as a cognate debate. Mr. President, the acting leader of government business did a wonderful job of articulating what the bill seeks to do, as well as the resolution in relation to the domestic debt and the external debt. And like her, I want to step back a bit and to look at where we have come and where we seem to be going. Rightly so, in 2018, it seems that something needed to be done to address our economic problems here in Barbados and to put the economy back on track and in balance. And many persons had, in various quarters, suggestions as to how we should do that. When the new administration came into office, they quickly defaulted on the debt, Mr. President. And we started a BERT program, the Barbados Economic and Recovery Transformation Program. And then subsequent to that, that became the cornerstone of the IMF Extended Fund Facility 4-year program that we're also in at the moment. And whether you like that or not, that was the medicine that the administration chose. And if you look at the numbers and you look at it purely from an economic standpoint, the government is on track on their plan. And what is interesting is there are two stories happening now. Because government has sought to go into an austerity program through the BERT program and the IMF program, we're actually seeing the effects of it on the economy itself. The last central bank report noted that the economy contracted by 0.2%. And that is actually on the backdrop of a number of contractions in the last few quarters. In December 2018, we recorded a contraction of 0.6%. In March of this year, we contracted again at 0.2%. In June, we contracted again at 0.2%. And now in September, we contracted at 0.2%. Me being a statistician, sir, I actually looked at the numbers and I wondered if somebody was cooking the books, because it's highly unlikely that you get the same number in every quarter over and over again, but I won't say that. But it stands to see that what is happening is, as government gets its house in order, the Barbadian economy is clearly in recession and continues to be in recession. And the important part of that conversation is we're seeing the effects of government pulling back on its expenditure in the economy and the effects that it is having throughout the economy in totality. What is also very interesting is it is highlighting how dependent we are, Mr. President, on the tourism industry. Despite the sector in the last report noting a 2.3% growth, we are growing. Our tourism sector is reaping benefits. It's growing. However, that growth is still not enough for our entire economy to see increases in GDP. And so what that does for me when I look at the picture on both the economy side and then more so at central government and government financing is everything comes at a cost. Everything comes at a cost. Because when the last administration was financing its business through printing money, as we call it, which is basically accumulating debt, our foreign reserves were dwindling, and our debt, as the acting leader of government business noted, we had a very high debt to GDP ratio. But what is interesting in that time frame was that GDP was actually growing. In 2015, we recorded 2.2% growth. In 2016, we had 2.5% GDP growth. And in 2017, we had 0.1%, which may not be technically said as growth, but nonetheless, it's on the positive side. But what is important to note there is, yes, it seems a bit strange. What is important there is, although government was printing money, the economy was growing, Mr. President. But it wasn't based on increased productivity. It wasn't based on new business, new jobs being created. It wasn't based on investment. It was almost an artificial inflation through government spending, through debt, Mr. President. So that is why it's sometimes better for us to look at the entire picture and how things are interlinked in our economy. Because a lot of persons are feeling the pinch at the moment through increased taxation and through the retrenchment program, a lot of persons are being sent home. However, government finances seem to be moving in the right direction. Again, I say, Mr. President, everything seems to come at a cost. What we're seeing now is that government has reduced our debt in total from 157% at its highest back in 2018. Now we're down to 121%. But sir, that is because government has chosen to either write off a lot of the debt or they simply have not paid persons what is owed. When you see the hit that the central bank would have taken, the NIS would have taken, and rightly as the bill is trying to validate this morning, the pensioners would have taken, government could not reduce the debt without a cost attached to it. There was some sacrifice that would have had to be made. And I want us to come to a point in our discussions where we understand the road ahead will not be easy. This is just the beginning. What we're also seeing in terms of government getting its finances together is the major reduction of expenditures, transfers and subsidies to state-owned enterprises. That's actually done by 25%. That's a major achievement. But in doing that, you had to reduce the amount of workers on your payroll, reduce the amount of resources that you finance to your institutions. And in some cases, you had to close organizations altogether, like the Barbados National Productivity Council. So on one hand, you had a society crying out for better management of the economy, but how this administration sought to do that was painful. I'm not saying that there is another way. Yes, there are other ways. Some people will say there are other ways. But nonetheless, the way that government has done it is by and large painful. I'm hearing too painful, Mr. President. But nonetheless, the domestic side, that is what we saw. We saw a reduction in the debt through almost a unilateral agreement where government said, take it or leave it. I remember standing in this same position saying, if you want a good example of almost bullying, that would have been a prime example. But nonetheless, Mr. President, when we look at the foreign debt exchange, it seems as though those creditors had a bit more leverage in negotiating with the government, unlike the domestic creditors. And you see it outlined in the schedule to the resolution, Mr. President. Our creditors said to us that we will take a haircut. We will take the haircut. We understand the economy has its challenges, and we also want back our money. So let us see if we can come to some agreement. And the negotiations, in principle, have agreed that they would take a 26.3% haircut in what is owed to them. However, they want their money back in full and interest in 10 years. And I say that because on the domestic side, you have instruments running 15 years. You also see, as Senator McConney noted, interest rates on the domestic instruments only got up to 3.75%, and the international creditors have negotiated a 6.5% interest rate. So, sir, what does that mean on the external side in terms of paying our debt with this new arrangement? It means that between the years 2020 and 2029, in total interest and principal, we will be paying out $940 million US dollars. Of that, interest is $360 million US dollars. And we will be making, sir, those payments every April and October. Sir, in April 2020, we start payments on interest that will amount to $17.7 million US dollars. And then in October of next year, approximately US $50 million. And we will close off our past due interest bonds in February 2021 with a smaller payment of US $4.6 million. So those are the payments necessarily for the external negotiation payments that we're discussing this morning for next year. But sir, then we move on to the period of 2021 to 2024, where every year we will be paying US $35.5 million in interest, semi-annually, April and October, as I said.
Mr. President, I'm sorry to interrupt Senator Drakes, but on a point of order, Senator Drakes is misleading the House. The arrangement with the external creditors includes a 5-year grace period. They actually suggested that, so we actually don't have to make payments immediately. We have up to 5 years to commence paying. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Continue.
maybe I am reading the resolution wrong. I know.
Just wish to say that there may be a big difference between a statement not being quite accurate and misleading the House. One is, the latter is quite deliberate, never accidental. So that generally the allegation should not lightly be made. That one is
Thank you,
misleading.
Mr. President. But nonetheless, sir, we then start the amortization and interest payments in 2025, as I was just interrupted, Mr. President. But nonetheless, sir, what we do know is that we are issuing $580 million US dollars. And what we will have to repay is about $940 million US dollars. And what we have to take into account is, although we talk about savings and the need for growth in the economy, what we have to remember is, although we have restructured the debt, we still have to pay the debt. And I think a lot of the narrative that goes out sometimes is people are a bit disillusioned by the euphoria that we've settled the debt. And sometimes I agree with Senator McConney, we have to speak in very real terms. Although we have settled the debt, it doesn't mean we don't have to pay the debt. And I'll go back to the point that I was making earlier about the economy. In trying to pay off the debt, you still have to have an economy that's functioning. You still have to be earning foreign exchange. So right now, we have, because we've deferred our debt service payments and we have had drawdowns from the IMF, we have $900 million in foreign reserves, net reserves. quote unquote, in the bank. But once those payments start, we have to find a way to grow the economy, Mr. President. And when those payments return onto our books, that is when the real test will come. Because there are a number of things that are in play at the moment. One is the government has very little wiggle room in its finances because we're still tied to the primary surplus of 6%. The last central bank report noted that we're at 4%. We need to get to 6% by the end of this financial year. Revenues are up by 9% this year. And that is actually mainly due to the early payments of property tax and the increase in VAT. And that is actually an important point because increases in VAT payments, yes. And not the rate in payments, Mr. President. And that is important to note because if we're going to reach the primary surplus of 6% because of the early payments of property tax and increases in VAT, one would then look at that scenario and ask, is that an anomaly that is happening? And what will happen in the following financial year when you don't get those early payments in property tax? Is the amount of tax revenues that you're currently taking in enough to satisfy reaching that 6% for the next 3 years? So those are all things, as I said, that we have to keep very close eye on. Sir, another thing that we have to look at is paying our debt while in the IMF program. If we default on any of the payments that are due between 2020 and 2022, then that reinstatement clause that is in the resolution then kicks in and the deal is off. And that has serious ramifications for this country and our credit worthiness, Mr. President. And sir, as I said, the other issue is growing the economy. I've heard many projects and investment opportunities that the government is noting that could possibly come into Barbados. But I also want to highlight that although we are looking for external foreign exchange, external investment, there are a lot of things that need reorienting in Barbados. I know we talk a lot about business facilitation and getting our doing business indicators moving in the right direction, and that is something that we have to do. But I have to stand here and say, as somebody who tries to do business in Barbados, the reality on the ground is it is extremely difficult. And so what I want to say is, in trying to grow this economy, Barbados has to move away from a 20th century mentality of how we do things, how our institutions are set up, how our procedures happen, how things are approved. And that will also come at a cost because change is not always easy. And at the national level, where we're talking about across the board, it will be difficult. Because, sir, this change will require us to increase our level of productivity, something that has been said time and time again. And in doing a lot of the things that will need to be done, it will make some people actually uncomfortable. There will be some very hard conversations we will have to have with persons across Barbados. You cannot go to work and think because you are at work, you deserve a paycheck. I know I may offend a lot of people, but I stand here as somebody, I am competing with people all across the world every day. I do not have the luxury of being unproductive. And as a nation, that is the mentality that we have to move forward with. Mr. President, through the private sector, you can no longer look at your staff as just persons who you utilize to make a profit. You have to start engaging them on a level where they have a vested interest and stake in the ownership of companies. Sir, it can no longer just be profit making, but it has to be socially oriented. You have to take care of your employees, and you also have to take care of the environment, people, planet, and profit. When you look at government, moving into the 21st century, government also has to reorient the way in which it provides social services. It also has to choose which social services are the bedrock of the things that they want to provide to the society, because it cannot do everything, and it cannot continue to shuffle people into organizations just because of a vote. We cannot compete in a world and continue to fool ourselves on the domestic end that we can continue as business as usual. The other side of this, sir, is the trade unions. And this is no offense to any trade union or any person or who is a member of the trade union. But the level of productivity that we have had in Barbados begs the question, what is it that our workers are doing that we cannot find the level of productivity that contributes to real GDP growth? And it's going to be to our detriment regardless of where you stand, because even if the argument is you have to employ people, in another 10 to 15 years when robotics and automation come into play, there will be no jobs. It's not a scare tactic, it's the reality. You have to prepare people. New jobs, yes, but you have to reorient the mindset of people, because we will be left behind in this race. So the role that the private sector, the government, and trade unions and all other stakeholders that we call the social partnership have cannot be the role that's identical to 1985. It has to be one that is more forward-thinking, and we have to have a serious discussion with our society on what 2035 Barbados looks like. And every decision that we make, at least for the most part, moves to that direction. We have to stop making excuses for a lot of the bottlenecks that happen for simple things. If I want to get very close to home, so I've had a burst main in my neighborhood for the last 2 months. I've called countless times. And the fact that I cannot call the Water Authority, give them the number that I am referencing to the problem, and they tell me where on the list I am in terms of getting to the problem, because I'm not saying come immediately, at least tell me where I am on the list. That information you cannot give to customers. But yet we're talking about bringing large investment into Barbados. Or is it that you have to have money to get things done? So, Mr. President, the debate about debt, for me, is a larger debate that I've tried to expand on this morning. And I thank the leader of government business for her expose on what the actual amendments are and the bill that is in front of us on the resolution. But there's a larger discussion that seriously has to happen. And government also has to seem as though it is carrying the burden with the rest of society. Because if that type of social division happens where it seems like some are high on the hog and some of us are bearing the brunt, you're not going to get the type of growth, holistic growth that you're looking for either. So, Mr. President, with that contribution, I'm obliged to you.
Recognize Senator Greenidge.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Senator Drakes made a statement less than 2 minutes ago. And she said that this debate on debt restructuring is a wider debate. And it is at that point that I said I would speak to something which I am noticing and which I think the Barbados public should know in terms of debt. Has to do with the commercial banks, sir. So you have a situation where the loans officers, or let's say a loans officer at a particular bank sits and tries to approve as many loans as possible. And that looks good to his superiors. A young couple goes in, sir. The lady says, I work at a gas station. I make so much money per week. The husband says, I do spear fishing. I make so much money per week. The loan is approved. And that couple is asked to pay $1,000 a month. Sir, all of us in here who work in the law courts will tell you that on an average, 15 cases per day before a particular judge, some judge. Those cases have to do with people who have defaulted on their debts, not because they do not want to pay, but because they can't pay. And so you have situations, sir, where the banks, in a flash, come down on these people who default, on this couple. And the bank says, and I am going to take possession of your house. I say this, sir, only because less than a week ago, it happened to a couple I was working for. With the best will in the world, that couple could not have continued paying $1,000 a month. And the bank came down and said, it's about time, we're going to take possession of your house. This bank ends up now with a file in which they have about 30-something houses that they've taken possession of. And they cannot get them sold. Some of them are being vandalized. Some of them are being vandalized, sir. And an easier thing to do, talking about restructuring of debt, would have been to call the people, talk to them, reschedule, reorganize the debt, and give them something that they can handle. Something that it would take them longer to pay. But they enlarge the period. They would be able to deal with it. But I am sure, sir, that if you go over now to the court and you look at today's court list, you're going to see before Judge A, 15 people, the bank and 15. Next judge, 15 people, the bank and 15. Next judge, bank and 15. And that is what is going on in this country, sir. But I thought, sir, that when Senator Drakes was speaking, that this is indeed a wider debate than just the question of this country restructuring its debt. Now, sir, where this particular matter is concerned, I do believe that government is extremely pleased about this, what I would term a temporary relief from our financial anxiety and our financial worries. I choose my words very carefully. Because, sir, it gives us some elbow room to do a few more things, to attend to a few of our social needs, such as the garbage trucks that everybody is talking about, transport board buses that everybody is talking about, improvement to our schools that people are talking about, the fixing of roads that all of us talk of. The point is, sir, that since we have the elbow room, that we have to use this relief wisely. We have to use it wisely. Sir, the economists refer to this as creating fiscal space. And it simply means that it gives us breathing room to get on with the government's programs. Sir, as Senator McCartney said, do you know what it means for government to have 1.2 billion Barbados dollars a year for the next 4 years to assist with these programs? We might not have been able to do some of the things which I've just mentioned were it not for this relief. We can at least pay some attention to our social agenda. Now, sir, I want to make the point very early because some people that have spoken to seem to have misconstrued what debt restructuring is all about. This is not about debt forgiveness. This is not about debt forgiveness at all. And people should not be misled into thinking that this form of debt restructuring means a complete elimination or write-off or erasure of the debt. It does not mean that at all. This adjustment to our debt restructuring, sir, affords us a more manageable and a more immediate way of dealing with our creditors, while at the same time making Barbados more resilient. It is about, sir, an adjustment to the amount of the debt and about an extension of the time of the repayment of the debt. And as I said, it puts us in a better position to deal with our immediate social problems. Mr. President, this opportunity to restructure our debt was due in large measure to the advice given by White Oaks, who was well placed to negotiate on our behalf with our creditors, with whom they had already formed a working relationship, having performed, as they said, similar tasks on behalf of other countries. But, sir, it is not only White Oaks that we have to thank. We have here, sir, a group of very talented economists, very talented advisors in Barbados. We have to thank persons, sir, like Dr. Craig Basco. We have to thank, sir, persons like Dr. Avinash Prasad. We have to thank, sir, persons like Dr. Kevin Greenidge. We have to thank, sir, persons like Mr. Ryan Strawn. And I stop here, sir. I stop here because I don't give people testimonials or good testimonials very often. But you see that minister called Ryan Strawn? He is a worker. He's a workhorse. That man is one of the best additions we have had to Barbados finances for long. He is a workhorse. I don't give people I don't give people testimonials as a rule, but I give him one. You want to come over? But sir, the point is that it took a lot of effort for us to get where we are, and we have some of our own people that we have to be very, very grateful for, too. And I remember, sir, when Dr. Avinash Prasad, when he spoke, and he praised White Oaks for what they had done. And he said, sir, that if a similar situation had to arise tomorrow, that he would advise us to use White Oaks again. He said that, sir. And that is as far as he was prepared to go at the time. Because, sir, there was no exulting, there was no gloating, there was no fanfare by him or by the government. Because all of us know, yes, we have reached a certain stage, but we are not yet out of the woods. Still have a long way to go. But sir, let the cynics talk. It is their right to talk. We can't stop them. I remember, sir, right in this Senate, there was criticism of White Oaks. There was a senator that called them fly-by-night. There was a senator that said that White Oaks was a bad choice and that he could have given better advice. But, sir, I am happy to say that because of the intervention, I'm very happy to say that we've been able to take off our debt restructuring box. And if it were left to some people, we might still be just tackling the default in loans repayment box. That would be the only thing that we would have been able to tackle. To pay $27 million to save approximately $5 billion is a no-brainer. That's a no-brainer. You don't got to think about that. To pay $27 million to save approximately $5 million. Billion, sorry, $5 billion. So there is I can say a close friend of mine. We sat side by side at school. This gentleman's name is Winston Cox. And he was the former governor of the central bank. And if we had to choose one local person to seek advice, from whom to seek advice in connection with negotiating a restructuring deal, sir, the name of Winston Cox would have to be mentioned. We would have to mention Winston Cox. No, hardly find anyone in Barbados, overseas, in the state, more qualified in public finance and banking than Winston Cox. And this is what Vincent Cox said. He said that it is a good and solid debt restructuring agreement which can put Barbados back on track. Not my words, the words of the former governor of the central bank. He said that the debt restructuring Barbados undertook was worth it. Not my words, the words of the former governor of the central bank. He said, sir, considering what the alternatives were, it is a good agreement. It is a good agreement. So I well recall the strategy of the last administration. I recall how they approached matters such as this. Pay no attention to downgrades. The attitude of their leader was, I am not losing any sleep because of rating agencies such as Standard & Poor's and Moody's. Not my words, not my words, not mine. And so they resorted to the continuous printing of money, even though they were told time and time again that they shouldn't do it. They were warned against it. Senator Drake said a few minutes ago that it was actually creating debt. And if that is what they were doing, then I draw the conclusion, sir, that they were being very unfair to this country. This was fiscal lawlessness at the highest level. That's the only way you can put it. Fiscal lawlessness at the highest level. And now, sir, they would want to advise this administration on what strategy we should use, and they would want to criticize us on the strategy that we are using. I remember the days, sir, and Senator Grant was part of this too. I'm not saying anything positive. I'm not saying anything positive about it. That's only a googly. I remember the first body that I spoke to, though, was not Senator Grant. The first person I spoke to was a gentleman called Tyrone Eswit, the late Tyrone Eswit. And he left over on that side, came over on our side. And the first thing he said was, those fellas over there don't know what they're doing. They don't know what is going on. I looked around and I saw Senator Grant. He jumped and he came up. He said, those fellas over there don't know what they're doing. And before I could look around, I saw Kerry Simmons. He said, those fellas over there don't know what they're doing. Joseph Tudor, those fellas over there don't know what they're doing. Clyde Mask, look, if I continue to call the names, I would be exhausted by the time I finish. Nobody with brains was left. That's the point I'm making. Nobody with brains was left. But now they want to advise us. With all the brains gone, they want to advise us on what strategy we should use. You know, so the leader of the Democratic Labour Party, she claimed recently, and let me say this up front, I will never say a bad word about that lady. I like her as a person, I like her as a lawyer. Honestly. So you're not going to hear me? No, but she did say that she was happy to see that the country will now be allowed to restructure its external debt, and that her party is relieved that it appears that Barbados is bringing this sordid chapter to an end. Those are her words. I scribbled them down. Those are her words. Not mine, hers. But I believe that what she really meant was bringing this sordid mess that the last administration left. Yes. To an end. And if that is what she said, I don't think she has anything to be ashamed about, because she had nothing to do with it. She was not the Minister of Finance. She was not the Minister of anything. She was not a member of cabinet. So I side with her too. And I say that we are doing our best to bring this sordid mess to an end. So about just over 2 years ago, with devaluation staring us in the face, every speech that Minister Sinclair, the finance minister, made centered around this. He always said this: what is your alternative? What is your alternative? Put something on the table. You tell us what to do. Better cannot be done. That was his tone, speech after speech. And you know, sir, at that time, we couldn't borrow a cent. We couldn't buy a donkey cart, far less a bus. We couldn't buy, sir, a wheelbarrow, far less a garbage truck. We were, I almost said the wrong thing, but we were in a quandary. We were in a quandary. We were in a quandary. Our strategy, Mr. President, is to be able to do these things without overloading ourselves with debt. And sir, we are called the government because we've been put here to govern. We have been put here to govern, and we cannot have a government within a government, as so many people seem to want. We cannot have a situation, sir, where we have to get permission from the leader of the opposition or the leader of the Democratic Labour Party on every senator we appoint, on every consultant we appoint, on every political decision that we have to make. Because if we do that, sir, in truth and in fact, we would not be governing. We would not be governing. Within days, sir, of our being in office, we bit the bullet. And we went to the IMF, and later we advised, or we devised, so they said, we devised the strategy that we should use. And that strategy, the one of debt restructuring and so on. And so I hope, sir, that we will never again, because it sounds so wrong to me, I hope, sir, that we will never again hear a government in office look over at an opposition and tell the opposition, tell me what to do. You advise us on what we should do. It sounds so wrong, sir. I hope I will never hear that call again, sir. Because the next thing you would know is that you pick up the whatever strategy it is, you run with it, and you take all the credit for it. But that was a tactic which was used by the last administration. Mr. President, I think I've said enough. I have a few more notes, but I think I've said enough. And I agree precisely with the debt restructuring strategy being used by this administration. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Have no fear. Have no fear. Thank you, Mr. President. I am again very happy to be able to support the bill and resolution which is before this honorable chamber. And I think, sir, that it is very important for us to reflect on what has brought us here. We've heard, sir, the phrase coined the lost decade. We've recognized, sir, that there has not been a lot, anything meaningful, anything tangible that would have been done by the last administration. I did hear Senator Drakes in her presentation speak to the issue of GDP growing, and I wanted, sir, to maybe start there and to look at what the gross domestic product was in 2007, and it was then about $9.5 billion, and to look at what the gross domestic product was in 2017, which would have been then about $9.7 billion. And those are represented, those figures in nominal terms, that's in dollar values. And what that clearly signals is that between 2007 and 2017, the Barbados economy did not grow. It was in a stage of stagnation. It did not grow. Senator Greenidge would have made reference to the fact that the last administration would want us to believe that downgrades did not matter. They would want us to believe that the foreign reserves, which, sir, in 2007, I believe would have been well above $1 billion. But with the inaction and the manner in which the last administration ran the government, we would have seen the foreign reserves going as low as about, I believe, 5 weeks of import cover. When the international standard, I believe, sir, is about 12 weeks. Although, I would always argue that for an economy such as Barbados, we probably need international reserves that are a little higher. We would have seen, sir, a situation where the Central Bank of Barbados was really the only entity that was taking up government paper. We saw a situation where the investment by the Central Bank in government paper moved, sir, from almost zero to close to $2 billion. And I reflect on those things, Mr. President. I think it is very important to do that because we must give a very clear indication to the people of Barbados as to the situation we have been confronted with. When this party came to office, sir, there was a situation where 64 cents out of every dollar was required to be paid in debt. And we have to properly reflect the situation when we came to office. And when I heard Senator Greenidge reference the fact that the last administration would not have wanted the Barbadian public to understand the importance of what the downgrades meant and the fact that there was nothing special with respect to the continuing decline in foreign reserves. They didn't understand it themselves. And it made me reflect on a story I once heard, sir. And, you know, it made me also reflect on their public relations and the manner in which they communicated with the Barbadian public. But I once heard a story, sir, of a man who stated that for him, it was a very, very sad day. And these were his words, not my words, sir. Today is a very sad day. A very good friend of mine who has spent 7 years in medical training was terminated from his job. What a waste of time, money, effort, and training for one minor indiscretion, because he had a sexual engagement with one of his clients, one of his patients. He went on to say, sir, that his friend was a good man, a decent man, a respectable man. And he said he was an ambitious and an excellent mortician. Sir, and you know, as I reflected, and I know some will get that a little late, but that is all right. The point that I am making, sir, is that you can paint a picture, and that picture you can seek to create an image of something being better than what it really is. The reality is, sir, that just as in that story, with respect to the man who speaks of his friend and the indiscretion of a professional, a mortician with his client, in a similar manner, the Democratic Labour Party in government, in a very vicious, unconscionable, and a very disrespectful manner, brought this economy to the brink, sir, of disaster. And that is the reality. That is the reality that we have had to deal with. So that I support the bill, sir, and I support the resolution, because I see it not simply as a measure standing by itself, but really it has to be observed in the context of the overall restructuring that is being undertaken by the Barbados government. The objectives, sir, of the BERT program, the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, sir, we know is to generate sustainable and inclusive growth. If we are going to ensure that we are able to provide a Barbados that gives even more benefits to our children and their children, then the path on which we were going, that path certainly was not one that would have brought any success for us. It would have simply ensured that the country became a failed state. So that what we are discussing today really is not only just about the debt restructuring, but understanding, sir, that it is within the context of an overall restructuring and adjustment to the Barbados economy, which is very, very critical. And part of the BERT program requires that there be comprehensive debt restructuring, and that, sir, is what is taking place. You know, Mr. President, every now and again I receive some letters from different institutions. And I received a letter from a company in Barbados saying that they invited me, as I believe they've invited other persons. You can come in and you can go and you can get, I think it's, they say, now up to $20,000. Well, that's Senator Franklin, with the number of members you are getting and your communication to us in terms of the extent of of their contributions and your own financial standing. I must say I'm not surprised that yours will be twice what mine is. I understand. I understand. But the point that I'm making is that this institution writes and says that you can come in and you can get $20,000. You don't have to go through the regular issues that you go through when you go to a commercial bank. And so I can go in, sir, and I can decide that I can take $5,000 or $10,000. I guess, sir, I could decide to do something ridiculous like buy ice and put it in the frying pan, because that makes absolutely no sense. Or I could decide that I will try to take that money and to create something that is worthwhile, that can give even more with respect to the investment that I'm making. And I reference that only to say that we had a situation where the debt increased significantly, but there's absolutely nothing to show for it. There are no buses, there are no garbage trucks, there are no new buildings, there's no new hospital. There's absolutely nothing to show the Barbadian public for the massive increase in the debt which we now have to confront. And that is a reality. And we have to ensure, therefore, sir, that as we create debt, that debt is doing something positive for us. I always make the point, Mr. President, it is not simply about the extent of the debt, the amount of the debt, but it also is about the capacity to repay the debt. And Barbados found itself in a situation when the government was forced to suspend the payment of the external debt. We are given the level of the foreign exchange reserves. This country was on the brink of a devaluation of the Barbados dollar, which would have resulted in living conditions for Barbadians being significantly worse. And while I accept, Mr. President, that everyone has to share the burden, I can say to you without any doubt that had we allowed things to continue as they were going, that all of us now, as we say in Barbadian terminology, would be sucking salt. And therefore, the action that was taken, sir, to save this country. Sir, it was not just about putting workers on the front line. It was not about that. Because all segments of the country were required, sir, to bear the burden. I just want, sir, in referencing that, to just speak briefly to an area that is of concern. And this relates, sir, to the commercial banks. And Senator Greenidge spoke with respect to persons going in and getting loans and the inability to pay the loans. But the area that concerns me, and it has concerned me before, relates, sir, to service charges and the manner in which commercial banks institute service charges. And we all know, sir, that yes, that the commercial banks have a profit motive, as does many other businesses. But we have to ensure that as we seek to restructure, and that as every entity and every person is required to share some burden, that there's not a situation where commercial banks utilize service charges in such a manner to ensure that their bottom lines continue and their profit margins continue to be healthy. And I just want us, sir, to be cautious of that, because I am aware that these days you go to a commercial bank, and I'm not calling any name, but you can go with a check drawn on that commercial bank where all of the information is there, and you have, if you don't have an account, to pay a significant fee. And all of the information is there. And I believe, sir, that that is wrong. And I think that it is a matter that has to be given some attention. Mr. President, we have instituted some measures with respect to the BERT program, and what has been the reality of those measures that have been undertaken. The reality is, Mr. President, that the economy has stabilized. Senator Drakes made reference to the fact that we see there's been a surplus of 4%. There's a fiscal primary balance. What she did not say is that it is the first time in 10 years that there has been a surplus. And we will continue to ensure that we function in such a manner to keep the economy healthy. Sir, the reserves are now in excess of $1 billion. Where it moved from, sir, where it was in the vicinity of just around $500 million to now in excess of $1 billion. I know, sir, it might be painful for some people to accept and to understand and to appreciate and even to recognize, but it is a reality, sir. It's not Rudy Grant saying so. It is what it is. Sir, the debt to GDP, by the figures that I have looked at, the debt to GDP was at 175%. Mr. President, the debt to GDP is now at 125%. And you know something, sir, and it's going down, and it's going down. Something that I did not reference before was the fact that when this party came to government, there were arrears in the amount of $1.2 billion. Those arrears, sir, now stand as at the 1st of April 2019, they were down to $293 million and being reduced. That is why, sir, some people are getting back returns. That is why, sir, some people are getting back the VAT returns. That is why, sir, that there's money there, sir, because of the restructuring to assist us in buying equipment that is necessary with the keeping Barbados clean and the providing access to persons to be able to transport throughout. Sir, there's been the reform and restructuring of state-owned enterprises to make them economically viable and sustainable. We must not just see this debt restructuring as a debt restructuring by itself, but we must look at it in the context of the overall BERT program and the policies that are being instituted by this government. Sir, I want to end by encouraging everyone to recognize that we need to stay the course. 2 Saturdays ago, Mr. President, I traveled to London to participate in World Travel Market. I left here, the flight left around 8:20 or so, about an hour outside of Barbados. The captain came on and said, there is some unexpected bad weather. And we have been in contact with the tower, and we will try to navigate as best as we can. And he said to the flight attendants to discontinue service, and we had, sir, for about 45 minutes, some serious turbulence. I mean, people were holding on to seats. I have not experienced that type of turbulence, sir, for quite some time. The reality is this, though. We made it safely to London because the captain and the pilots, they stayed the course. They recognized, yes, there was some turbulence that existed, but, sir, they stayed the course. I see Reverend Rogers smiling, sir, and seeing him smile, I remember, sir, your I see Reverend Rogers smiling, and it jogged my memory in relation, sir, to, I believe it was the Apostle Paul. I have fought a good fight. I finished the course. I have kept the faith. And of course, there would have been turbulent times as well. But the reality is that he stayed the course. He kept the faith. And I'm saying, Mr. President, that while these measures that we introduce do cause a measure of pain, that by staying the course, we ensure that there's the financial stability. We ensure, sir, that there's improved international competitiveness for Barbados. We ensure, sir, that we are able to restore our debt rating so that instead of having downgrades, we will be upgraded, sir, and that we will be able to have access to financing that we have not been able to access in recent years. I think, sir, it is important for us not only to stay the course because of those measures, but important as well to ensure that the livelihood and the standard of living in Barbados is improved, to ensure that all Barbadians are able to achieve and to recognize that Barbados does have a future for them. I ask Barbadians, sir, to stay the course because I am confident that with the measures being introduced by the government and the results that we are already seeing, that it will be guaranteed to provide a better life for our people. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Mr. President, I beg to move that we now suspend for lunch and return at, I beg to move that we now suspend for lunch and return at 2:30. I am being urged by my senators to give them a little bit more time to swallow, and therefore I would like to adjust the time to 2:45 for our return.
Is that this session be now suspended until 2:45 for lunch. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it, and we are now in suspension until 2:45.